Judge Napolitano walked into that courtroom ready to dominate, cutting Michelle Obama off mid-sentence, mocking her as just another political witness and accusing her of contempt of court. But seconds later, Michelle dropped a legal and financial bomb that exposed his conflict of interest on live television, froze him in his seat, forced him to slam the gavel in panic, triggered a national scandal, and left the entire courtroom and millions of viewers sitting in stunned silence. Federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. felt more like a TV studio than a courtroom. That morning, everyone knew this hearing wasn't routine and today's session was being broadcast live. Michelle opened her binder and didn't ease into it. She went straight for the numbers, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the room. Since 2020, she said, polling locations in targeted districts have been shut down without proper notice. Voting hours have been reduced in working-class neighborhoods and access points have been quietly moved farther away from public transportation. She looked up at the bench. That's not administrative cleanup, that's deliberate obstruction. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats. Napolitano leaned forward immediately. "Watch your language," he snapped. "This is a courtroom, not a campaign rally." Michelle didn't blink, then stopped treating documented harm like it's campaign noise. She fired back, "These numbers represent real citizens who were pushed out of the democratic process." Napolitano cut in again, louder this time. "Correlation doesn't equal intent, you're speculating." Michelle flipped a page and slid a printed chart forward. "Speculation is guessing, this is pattern analysis," she said. "When 80% of closures hit the same communities across different counties under the same internal guidelines, that stops being coincidence." She leaned slightly toward the microphone. "It becomes strategy." The judge scoffed. "You're dressing politics up as law." Michelle's tone hardened. "No, Your Honor, I'm exposing law being used as a weapon." The room went tight and quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. Then she dropped the line that made the press row sit up straight. "Let me remind this court what the Supreme Court already settled," she said in Baranovicki versus DNC. The court ruled that discriminatory impact combined with coordinated administrative action can establish constitutional violation. She didn't stumble over a word. "That's not my opinion, that's precedent." Napolitano opened his mouth to interrupt, but she kept going. "So when you tell me to stick to facts, what you're really saying is you don't like the legal outcome those facts lead to." A ripple of murmurs ran through the gallery. One camera zoomed so close you could see the tension in Napolitano's jaw. He slammed his pen down. "You're pushing a narrative." Michelle shook her head slowly. "No, I'm pushing accountability," she said. "And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's because this courtroom isn't used to hearing the full truth out loud." She pointed back to the binder. "Every page in here is sworn testimony, verified data and federal records. You can interrupt me, you can talk over me, but you can't erase what's already on paper." The judge shifted in his chair, clearly irritated. The media section was buzzing now, producers whispering, reporters typing fast, phones recording every second. Michelle straightened her posture and locked eyes with the bench. "You asked for facts, I brought facts. You asked for evidence, I brought evidence," she said. "What you seem to want is silence, and that's one thing I'm not here to give you." The room felt like it was about to snap. The power struggle was no longer subtle, it was out in the open, raw and public, with millions watching. Napolitano's face hardened. He leaned forward, lifted the gavel, and cut through the noise with a sharp, cold voice. "You are out of order," he said, staring directly at Michelle. "This court will not be used as a platform for political attacks." The room froze. He raised the gavel higher this time, holding it in the air for a long second, letting the tension stretch. Then it came down hard. The crack echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. "I am holding you in contempt of court," Napolitano declared. "You are fined $2,000, effective immediately." For a moment, nobody moved, no whispers. Michelle slowly stood up from her chair. Not in anger, not in panic. She simply rose to her feet and straightened her jacket. Her face was calm, almost unreadable, but her eyes were different now. The polite professionalism was gone. What replaced it was something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. Controlled steel, she looked around the room once, letting the cameras capture the moment, then turned back to the bench. Napolitano crossed his arms, clearly expecting her to back down. Maybe apologize, maybe sit quietly and take the hit. That's what usually happened. Powerful judges were used to instant submission, but Michelle didn't give him that satisfaction. She took a slow breath and spoke in a low, steady voice. If you believe punishing me will change the facts I presented, then you've already made your position clear. The words landed heavy. You could feel the mood shift. Reporters leaned forward. Even the court clerk stopped moving. Napolitano snapped back. This is not a debate. You will respect this court. Michelle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Respect is not silence, she said, and authority is not the same thing as truth. A few gasps rippled through the gallery. The tension was now visible on every face in the room. Michelle didn't sit back down. She stayed on her feet, shoulders squared, voice calm but carrying across the room. Your Honor, I accept your contempt citation, she said, then paused just long enough to make everyone look up. But I also formally challenge its legality. Napoleon frowned. You don't get to challenge my rulings, he snapped. Michelle lifted her chin slightly. Actually, I do, she replied. Under the speech or debate clause of the Constitution, members of Congress are protected when speaking on pending legislation. My testimony here today falls directly under that protection. The room stirred. A few lawyers in the audience exchanged looks. Michelle continued, by fining me for presenting legislative evidence, you are crossing the separation of powers. That's not courtroom discipline, that's constitutional overreach. Napolitano's confident posture wavered for the first time. He shifted in his chair, eyes narrowing, then glanced down at his notes as if buying himself time. Michelle didn't let up. The judiciary does not get to punish Congress for doing its job. She said. That wall exists for a reason. It protects democracy from exactly this kind of pressure. She took a step forward, closer to the microphone. So the real question isn't whether I was out of order. The real question is whether this court just stepped outside its authority. The press row went quiet, then erupted into frantic typing. On the Republican side, aides were suddenly glued to their phones, thumbs flying, whispering urgently to one another. The courtroom felt frozen in place. Even the court reporter stopped typing, hands hovering above the keyboard, eyes darting between Michelle and the bench. Napolitano opened his mouth, closed it. Sheen tried again. You are misinterpreting the Constitution, he said, but his voice lacked the sharp edge it had before. Michelle shook her head slowly. No, Your Honor, I'm reading it exactly as it was written, she answered, and the fact that this contempt ruling targets protected legislative speech makes it legally weak and publicly dangerous. A low murmur spread through the gallery. Napolitano looked out at the room, then at the cameras, then back at Michelle. The man who had entered the courtroom in full command now looked cornered. His fingers tightened around the gavel, but he didn't raise it. Michelle held her ground, eyes steady, posture unshaken. Then Michelle reached into her folder and pulled out a tablet, holding it up just enough for the front row to see. Before this court questions my credibility, she said calmly, we need to address yours. Napolitano stiffened. What are you implying? He asked sharply. Michelle tapped the screen. 3 weeks ago on Fox News, you said, and I quote, the Protecting Voting Rights Act is reckless federal overreach that threatens the integrity of American elections. Those were your words. A wave of whispers rolled through the courtroom. Napolitano tried to wave it off. That was commentary, not judicial conduct. Michelle didn't hesitate. When a sitting judge publicly attacks the very law being debated in his courtroom, it stops being commentary and starts becoming conflict. The tension spiked instantly. Cameras zoomed tighter. Producers in the back started signaling frantically. Michelle scrolled and read again, slower this time, making sure every word landed. You didn't just criticize the bill, you questioned its legitimacy and framed it as dangerous, she said. Then today you fine me for defending that same legislation. That's not neutral. That's biased. Napolitano shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. Michelle turned another page. Now let's talk about the Judicial Code of Conduct, she continued. Canon 2, a judge must avoid impropriety and the appearance of Impropriety in all activities. She paused and looked up, not some activities, all activities. The press section exploded into motion. Reporters were typing so fast you could hear the keys clicking, phones were raised, live feeds lit up. Michelle kept going, her voice steady but relentless. Canon 3, a judge shall perform duties impartially and without prejudice, she read. So tell me, Your Honor, how does? Publicly condemning this law on national television and then punishing testimony in its defense meet that standard. Napolitano opened his mouth, then closed it again. He glanced toward his staff. Clearly unsettled, Michelle didn't give him room to recover. This isn't about me anymore, she said. This is about whether this courtroom is being run by the Constitution or by personal ideology. The room felt electric. Michelle locked eyes with the bench. You tried to frame me as a political witness, she said. But your own words just made you the political actor in this room. Michelle didn't sit down, she didn't slow down. She lifted the tablet again, this time holding it higher so even the back rows could see the screen glow. There's one more issue, who this court needs to face, she said, and this one isn't about words, it's about money. A low ripple ran through the room. Napolitano leaned forward sharply. This is irrelevant, he snapped. Michelle tapped the screen. Brennan and Associates, she said clearly. A law firm that has received millions of dollars from the Republican National Committee to challenge voting rights legislation across multiple states. She paused and looked directly at the bench. According to your federal financial disclosure forms, you personally hold stock in this firm, not a symbolic amount, not pocket change, nearly $1 million. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Reporters froze for half a second, then exploded into typing. Cameras zoomed so tight you could see Napolitano's eyes widen. Napolitano shot up in his seat. That is false, he barked, his voice suddenly louder and less controlled. You are lying to this court. Michelle didn't raise her voice, she simply turned the tablet toward the clerk's desk. I'm reading directly from your filed disclosure with the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. She said line item 47, Equity Holdings, Brennan and Associates, $847,000. The courtroom assistant overseeing the hearing hesitated, then stood. Your Honor, he said carefully, those filings are public record. The Congresswoman's citation appears accurate. The room exploded. On the Republican side, aides jumped to their feet, shouting objections and waving their hands. Some were on their phones again, panic written all over their faces. Democratic staffers leaned forward, stunned but focused, watching the collapse unfold in real time. Napolitano slammed his palm on the bench. This is outrageous, he shouted. This hearing is out of control. His voice cracked, the calm authority gone. Michelle stepped closer to the microphone. What's out of control, she said, is a federal judge ruling on voting rights while financially tied to a firm whose profits depend on killing those same laws. She held up the tablet. Again, that's not just a conflict of interest, that's a credibility disaster. The judge's face flushed deep red. He tried to speak, stumbled over his words, then raised his voice again. You are twisting facts, he yelled. Michelle didn't flinch. No, Your Honor, she said quietly, I'm connecting them. The room felt like it was shaking. Reporters were standing now, trying to get clear shots. Producers were whispering urgently into headsets. The court reporter had stopped typing again, staring at the bench in disbelief. Michelle took a slow breath and delivered the final blow. You fine me $2,000 for disrespect, she said. But the real disrespect here is to this court, to this process, and to the American people. Napoleon gripped the edge of the bench, visibly rattled, his voice no longer steady, no longer commanding. The courtroom was still buzzing when Michelle took one slow step forward and lifted her head. Her voice cut through the noise without shouting. Based on the financial conflict that has now been placed on the record, she said, I formally move that you recuse yourself from this proceeding. The words hit like a hammer. Napolitano stared at her, stunned. Michelle didn't wait. A judge with a direct financial stake in litigation connected to this law cannot claim neutrality, she continued. That alone invalidates your authority in this case. The gallery erupted again, but she stayed locked in. focused on the bench. Then she turned to the contempt ruling. "And as for the $2,000 fine," Michelle said calmly, "it is constitutionally defective." She raised her hand slightly, ticking off each point. "It targets protected legislative speech, it violates separation of powers, and it was issued under an ethical cloud created by your own undisclosed conflict." MC landed heavier than the last. "That makes this ruling not just questionable," she added, "but unenforceable." Napolitano opened his mouth to interrupt, but nothing came out at first. His face tightened, eyes darting toward his staff and then back to the cameras. For the first time since the hearing began, the judge looked lost. He gripped the edge of the bench, breathing harder now. This hearing is no longer productive," he said, his voice uneven. The authority that once filled the room was gone. He lifted the gavel again, but it didn't carry the same weight. "Court is in recess," Napolitano announced sharply, striking the bench once more. He stood up fast, turned away from the room, and walked through the door behind the bench without looking back. No final warning, no closing statement, just an exit that felt more like retreat than control. The room exploded into chaos. Lawyers stood up talking over one another, reporters rushed toward the aisle, staffers scrambled, phones pressed to their ears. But in the middle of all of it, Michelle didn't move. She remained standing at the witness table, hands resting lightly on the binder, breathing steady, eyes forward. The clip hit the internet before the courtroom doors even finished closing. The freeze frame of Napolitano's gavel mid-swing became the thumbnail everywhere, stamped across news feeds, YouTube headlines, and social media timelines. Legal analysts went live within minutes. One former federal prosecutor summed it up in a single sentence that spread fast: "This wasn't shouting, this was courtroom chess." Others broke down Michelle's moves frame by frame, calling out how she forced the judge into mistakes without ever raising her voice. Meanwhile, media insiders were already calling it one of the most explosive legal broadcasts of the year. "He underestimated her completely," one network host said on air. "He thought he was controlling the room, he ended up losing it." On social media, the reaction was even louder. Hash shot up the trending list in under an hour. Short clips of Michelle standing calmly while the gavel came down were shared millions of times. People replayed the moment where the judge hesitated, slowed it down, zoomed in on his face, and turned it into memes and commentary videos. Some called it justice, others called it humiliation. Either way, nobody could look away. The hearing wasn't just news, it was a national moment looping across phones, TVs, and laptops, pulling millions of Americans back into the same question: who really controlled that courtroom? While the public argued online, something much quieter and far more serious started happening behind closed doors. The Judicial Ethics Committee announced a formal review of Napolitano's conduct. Congressional leaders moved fast, drafting subpoenas tied to his financial disclosures and courtroom behavior. By the next morning, federal investigators confirmed a preliminary inquiry into potential conflicts of interest. The pressure wasn't just political anymore, it was legal, it was institutional, it was real. Then came the leak that changed everything. A whistleblower from inside a regulatory office quietly submitted additional financial documents connected to the same law firm Michelle had exposed. The records showed deeper ties, larger transactions, and timelines that raised even more red flags. Staffers described phones ringing nonstop, lawyers scrambled, statements were rewritten again and again. The White House responded carefully, refusing to take sides publicly but confirming they were monitoring the situation closely. Behind the scenes, everyone knew what this meant. What started as one courtroom clash had turned into a full-scale power fight, pulling judges, lawmakers, investigators, and political leaders into the same storm. When Michelle finally stepped outside the courthouse, reporters rushed forward, shouting questions from every direction. She didn't smile, she didn't celebrate, she raised one hand calmly and spoke in a steady voice. "This was never about embarrassing anyone," she said. "It was about protecting the right to vote and defending the integrity of our democracy." She paused, letting the noise settle. Ego doesn't build trust. Accountability does. Then she closed her binder, nodded once, and turned away from the microphones. As she walked down the courthouse steps, the crowd went quiet. No cheers, no chants, just silence and camera shutters clicking as people watched her leave. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy, but it felt heavy with meaning. The moment didn't belong to a judge, a fine, or even a viral clip anymore. It belonged to the idea that preparation, discipline, and calm pressure can break through even the loudest displays of authority. And as the final shot faded out on her walking into the distance, one message lingered in the air, clear and undeniable. Power isn't volume, it's preparation. If this story opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss the moments they don't want you to see. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who cares about real accountability, and stay with us because the next truth bomb is